of the application process and giving you some really great advice about how to get in. So just a few quick words about Fortuna before I introduce the panelists. The firm was started 5 years ago by former directors of admissions. This dream team of former admissions officers have been gatekeepers at 12 of the top 15 schools. So they really know the inside game about how to apply and what schools are really looking for. These are the folks who until recently were actually reading your files. You were probably cursing them if you were rejected. They were sitting across from you during interviews and making the decisions about whether or not you were an admit or a ding. So I think there's really no other admissions coaching team as qualified as Fortuna, given the exclusive place that they sat in all these different business schools. So tonight, actually it's not tonight, depending on where you are, right? I mean, for some of you, it may in fact be tonight. For me, I'm on the East Coast today, so it's sort of the middle of the day. We have, in any case, two members of the Fortuna team. We have the one and only Caroline Diarte Edwards, someone I've known for a number of years now, and I can say that she's a terrific lady and a really smart and insightful person on the business of admissions. He had been director of admissions, marketing and financial aid at INSEAD from 2005 until 2012. She also is an INSEAD MBA, no surprise there. She was the primary gatekeeper at the school and shaped much of the school's admissions policy. She, besides her MBA at INSEAD, she completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Cambridge, so she's super smart. And Caroline has also worked as a management consultant and a development officer for the International Finance Corporation, IFC, and has lived and worked in 9 countries across 3 continents, and I found out today she may add a new country to that list. So, and then we have Emma Bond, who you can see on the screen. Emma is senior manager at London Business School, with responsibility for full-time MBA admissions. She remains in close contact with the school, and in fact, both Caroline and Emma do. And you will be finding out really the latest updates from both those schools because both of them have had recent conversations with the admissions teams at both LBS and INSEAD. She has a unique breadth of knowledge and insight into the school's programs, recruiters, and selection process. She has also worked as European recruitment manager for BCG, that is Boston Consulting Group, for those of you who don't know. She is originally from New Zealand, even though she sounds like she is from England, right? And in fact, now
I'm not sure if Brits would agree with you, John, but yeah.
And she now lives in the UK, well, about a half hour out of London, I think, right?
Okay, yeah.
Super. So let's take a look at our agenda today. What are the top schools looking for? We'll cover that. How can candidates stand out in the applicant pool? What are the most common mistakes that applicants make in applying to a highly selective school like London Business School or INSEAD? What's a good timeline for application planning? Hint, right now. And then we're going to finish with a Q&A. Before we dive in, let's just deal with a few housekeeping points. If you have any technical issues on your end, you can send Melissa Jones a direct note in the chat box, and she'll try to help you. We're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end of our webinar, so you can ask whatever questions you want. We'll pick and choose them so that we don't answer the same question more than once, and we satisfy as much of the audience as we possibly can. And finally, if you have to sign off early, we are recording the session, and you will be able to find all of it on the FortunaAdmissions.com website. So, welcome, Caroline and Emma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John.
Okay, let's start with you, Caroline. What were the specific qualities you were looking for in candidates when you were head of admissions at INSEAD?
Sure, yes. I mean, INSEAD is quite transparent about the admissions criteria, and there are 4 key pillars to the evaluation process, and that's really how they structure the evaluation of every candidate's file. So the school's looking at your academic track record. So they're looking for academic excellence. It's, as you know, it's an intense program. You have 12 months to complete your MBA, so the pace is really fast. So they are looking for people who, have the ability to keep up with that. You have exams every 8 weeks. There's not really time to make a slow start or to catch up if you get behind. So they're looking to see, if you have a strong undergraduate track record. They'll be looking at your GMAT or your GRE. And they'll be looking at that in combination. So, if your GPA isn't fantastic, then you can compensate for that to a certain extent with a strong test score, and vice versa. If you have an outstanding undergrad record, but your GMAT isn't stellar, then, one can help to balance out the other. So that's the first thing they look at. Then secondly, they're looking at your professional track record. So they're looking for people who, have already demonstrated clear achievement. They've already demonstrated that they're capable of, driving solid results. And the school takes the perspective that past performance is the best predictor of future potential and future success. And so they'll be scrutinizing, how your career has evolved over time. Whether you've progressed, are you on a fast track? Have you been promoted? Do you have any management experience? The school really likes to see some evidence of team management or project management experience to see, how you've performed in that context. And they're not looking for any particular type of work experience, quite to the contrary. They're looking to build a class of people who have very diverse professional experiences and can bring different perspectives to the classroom. But really, the common thread is the quality of your work experience and the level of achievement in the time that you've had so far to demonstrate that in however many years that may be.
And Emma, how does that differ from LBS and the other M7 schools in terms of what teams are looking for?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities between INSEAD and LBS. So and in some respects, there's a lot of similarities between those two schools and also the M7 schools. They're all, looking for, as Caroline mentioned, the academic excellence, the strong professional track record, evidence of leadership, and that's sort of in the classroom and outside the classroom. So, engaging with the community and taking on roles, whether it's sort of voluntary charity work or whether it's in sports teams or, whatever it might be. And then I think perhaps the main difference between the M7 schools and these two top European schools is perhaps the global profile and the fact that both schools are really, really keen to bring in a class this year that reflects sort of true global diversity. So both schools have, candidates applying from all over the world, and it results in a class that is very, very global. Now, that experience may have been from somebody who's lived and worked in multiple countries. From somebody who's been educated, growing up and moved around a lot. Someone like Caroline, who's now traveling sort of every couple of years. But it may equally be somebody who has perhaps gained that experience from working across multicultural teams, so working across cross-border, alliances and networking and corresponding on a daily basis with colleagues in different countries, different sort of geographies and from different cultures. I think perhaps Caroline and I were chatting about this before. INSEAD perhaps tends to be slightly more strict on that criteria than LBS. LBS will be slightly more flexible, but it's definitely something that both schools really highlight in terms of what they expect from future students. And also, that's reflected in things like the languages requirement. LBS has actually pulled back on that slightly for the new application season, so they won't any longer be requiring people to graduate with an extra language, whereas INSEAD is still requiring the additional languages. So, there are some differences, but I think if you are somebody that fits that kind of very global profile, those are two schools that you should really consider applying to.
Now, both INSEAD and LBS have video components to their applications. Caroline, why did they introduce that, and how does it actually work? And is it something that applicants should be scared of?
No, that's not the intention anyway. Both schools introduced this last year, and some of the US schools had introduced it previously as well. Kellogg has had some video questions for a while. So the intention is to give the admissions committee and the file readers the opportunity to observe the candidate directly. And both INSEAD and London Business School, the interviews are conducted by alumni. So the person who's reading your file and then the people who are actually deciding on your candidacy would never have met you or are unlikely to have met you in person and actually have the opportunity to observe how you communicate, how, if you're not a native English speaker, how good is your English, are you able to think on your feet, etc. So this mechanism is a great opportunity for the school to get a little bit of direct input from the candidate in a way that is not scripted, right? So you don't know in advance what the questions are going to be. The questions are generated randomly from a database of a huge number of questions. So you can't at all you can't predict what questions you will get. So it's very much a sort of a spontaneous exercise. And that's part of the challenge. And I encourage candidates to think about it as in many ways it's like a mini interview. So with INSEAD you get 4 questions. The questions are typical interview questions, but some of them can be quite specific. It could be looking for an example of when you've had to influence someone to do something that they didn't want to do, or when you've had to deal with a difficult colleague or client, or they could be quite sort of probing questions like, what is your definition of success? There's a very broad range of questions that could come up. So you need to prepare by, going through some example questions that could come up in an MBA interview situation. And part of the challenge as well is the timing. So for INSEAD, you log onto the platform when you're ready to start responding to the questions. Then you'll get the question, you get 45 seconds to prepare your response, and then you get 60 seconds, 45 seconds to prepare, 60 seconds to deliver your answer. And it cuts you off after 60 seconds. So managing that timing is quite tricky. It can be difficult to especially if it's a wide-ranging question, to try and wrap up in that short time frame. But no one is perfect in that kind of situation, right? It's not something that you can prepare. It's not like doing a presentation. So I would say to candidates, don't get too stressed about it. Don't expect that each of your 4 questions you'll deliver a perfect response. You probably won't. The school is not looking for perfection. They're really looking to get a sense for how do you think on your feet, how do you communicate, do you look like someone, or do you sound like someone, and how you communicate that would engage well in the INSEAD classroom. Now INSEAD requires you to submit these interview questions at the time of submitting your written application. So you have 48 hours after the admissions deadline to submit those video recordings, and that's a bit different versus LBS, right, Emma? Because at LBS, the interview questions or the video questions are at the interview stage.
That's right, yeah. So if you're selected to interview, then you'll be notified how to go about that from the admissions committee. It's a similar process in terms of some set questions and then free questions. But I think it is really important for people to realise that it's not some kind of major test. It's more to give the admissions committee a sense of people's energy and people's charisma, and just to kind of take you off the page, really, because that's working in the admissions office, that's the only way sort of back in the day that we actually got to know people was from a sheet of paper and then from the alumni interview. So it's just to kind of bring people to life a bit more.
So Emma, did I hear you right in saying that LBS doesn't require all applicants to do the video component? In other words, you have to pass a certain screen to get to there?
Exactly. Once you find out whether you have been offered an interview, and if you are successful at interview stage, then you will be asked to do the video interviews then as part of that process.
I see. And INSEAD makes the video component available to all. Is that correct?
That's right. You have to submit that as part of the initial application.
Right. Okay, so Emma, since I hear your close friend is Theresa May, I'm wondering if you might comment on all the talk internationally about both Brexit and our wonderful president here in the United States. You know, there was a recent GMAT report that, in fact, just came out this week. We wrote about it on Poets Quants that showed a high percentage of test takers expressing concern and perhaps intent that they wouldn't apply to a U.S. school because of all the commentary about basically the U.S. becoming a less welcoming place for immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting year, isn't it? Because after the Brexit vote last June here in the UK, there was a lot of, I guess, uncertainty amongst business schools here. And I had discussions with people in my network at Imperial Business School, at London Business School, about, you know, how this was actually going to impact candidates applying in future years. You know, did it make Britain look less welcoming to people coming in by saying, no, we don't want anything to do with the European Union anymore? And there was quite some concern about how that would impact. And then luckily our good friends in America decided to vote in President Trump. And that has, you know, that combined with the fact that sterling devalued quite substantially has meant that, for example, LBS has seen a bump in applications around about 25%. Since, you know, over the last applications year. So wow. I think, you know, yes, there is a cost factor. So the UK certainly is suddenly much more attractive than it was 2 years ago. It's a lot cheaper to do your degree here. I think people are aware that in terms of Brexit, we don't really know what's going to happen. So you could say, no, we're not going to come to the UK, but then it may still be very similar for people graduating from MBAs, you know, in 2-3 years' time.
Right.
My own feeling re-Brexit is that even should the market in terms of MBA recruitment tighten slightly, schools like LBS will still be fine because the recruiters that are here will still look to the very top schools to get the talent that they need. They still need talent, therefore if it's, you know, less talent, they'll still go to schools like INSEAD and LBS regardless. In terms of the US, yeah, certainly I think schools across Europe, INSEAD and LBS will be seeing a surge in applications this year because people are concerned about the effect that will have. And as you say, you wrote about it last week. I think, you know, how welcoming does the US feel at the moment for people coming in from abroad, and people are concerned about that. So all I can say is it's positive news at present for schools in Europe.
I might even say it could be positive news for an international candidate who would be applying in a smaller international pool at a U.S. school if, in fact, there was any significant dryout in applications internationally, right?
Yeah.
So Caroline, drawing on your experience in the admissions office, I want to understand how you put together a diverse class. Does an Indian engineer actually compete with a McKinsey consultant or a Wall Street banker or someone from the oil and gas industry? Or is that really not true?
Right. Well, I mean, all the candidates are in competition with each other, but the admissions team does need to sort of organize the files so that, you know, they go through a process where they're comparing some similar candidates with each other. So how they put those files and groups of files together depends on, you know, which are the more common profiles in the pool at that time. At INSEAD, the school will classify and group files by nationality and then compare some of the national groups or regional groups together. And then within those groups, they will compare professional groups as well. So, for example, they will look at the US pool and look at people coming from banking, or the US pool, people coming from consulting. They'll put together, you know, one of the biggest pools will be the Indian engineers, and they'll put, you know, the Indian engineers together, and you know, may break that further down into sort of different types of backgrounds and different companies and so on. You know, sometimes schools will get a number of applications from, you know, even the same company, the same office, the same location, and they don't, you know, necessarily want you know, somebody from the Beirut office of McKinsey in every single section at school. So, you know, they'll be comparing those and trying to figure out, you know, which are the more common profiles we're getting for this class. and then looking to see, how those profiles compare. So yes, I mean that's often how they'll do, the initial screening to figure out who they're going to invite for interview, is to put, the most common profiles together and group files by certain criteria, often nationality and professional background.
And that naturally leads to the next question. I'll give this to Emma. Okay, let's say you're in an overrepresented part of the pool. You happen to be a management consultant, you happen to be from Wall Street, or you happen to be an Indian engineer. How do you stand out from the crowd?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is true that there are certain profiles that the admissions office see over and over again, and some that they see much more than others. And, the sad fact is that no matter how amazing you might think you are, you're going to come up, when you apply to a top school, against a huge pool of people who have very similar sort of statistics that you do. So, or you might be up against a group of people who want to make a very traditional kind of change. So you might, using the example Caroline did, a software engineer, you might want to make a shift to management consulting, which is a very common route that, that people try to take via an MBA. There are ways to make yourself stand out, and I think probably the first one of those is to make sure that you understand the school that you're applying to very well. So you need to kind of try and learn as much as you can, do your research, find out, what the particular school values are, and then align your story with those values. So if you look at LBS, which sort of prides itself on being very global, being a very eclectic community, being a school that encourages sort of engagement, you need to pull out the facets of your profile that are, that reflect those values, and then demonstrate those in smart, smart essays. And I think you also have to remember that it's not all about professional experience, it's not all about numbers. So it's no use kind of saying, hooray, here's my 740 GMAT and here's my 3.8 GPA and aren't I wonderful? A good example, actually, I worked with a really lovely client last year who had applied to LBS, and he was from an overrepresented pool, and he was waitlisted last year, the previous year at LBS, and then he was dinged, which is a soul-destroying process to go through. So he came to Fortuna and said, how can you help me? So I worked with him, and I looked at his application from the previous year, and actually on paper there was nothing wrong with it. He hadn't done anything incorrectly, and he ticked all the boxes in terms of statistics. But actually it was a very dry application, and it didn't tell the reader very much about him as a person. So yes, he ticked all the professional side of things, yes, he was great academically, but that was kind of it. And there was no, he hadn't realized that it's really important to round out your personal profile as well. So, we talked a bit about what he enjoyed doing, how he was going to get engaged with the school community, what he'd been doing in his own home community, whether he had any kind of, hidden entrepreneurial ambitions, and it was all about kind of making him into a real person. And I think being able to do that, and that's why I see the video component as a positive thing. It allows people to make themselves more interesting. And he was accepted this year and has a place in the program and is very happy. But it wasn't, he was the same person that he was the previous year. It was just about selling himself more effectively and making his profile memorable. Right.
So that's a mistake, obviously, because people do want to see the real you. They just don't want to see, a professional representation of you. They want to know who they're putting in their classes. What other mistakes, Caroline, do you see candidates make in their applications?
Yeah, I mean, as Emma said, relying too much on the bare stats, and so, assuming if you've got a 740 GMAT that the school's going to love you, there's a lot more to it than that, as we've said. So making assumptions that, some elements of your profile that may be very strong will compensate for big weaknesses in another area. You can't take that for granted, and so sometimes we'll see schools will see candidates who have fantastic undergrad track record, great professional experience, but they really haven't tried very hard with the GMAT, but they assume, well, it doesn't matter because I'm so great anyway, the school will look past GMAT. Well, it's not necessarily the case. You're in a very competitive pool, and if other people who have a great academic background, great professional experience, plus a great GMAT are, being compared to you, then who is going to be put forward to interview? So, don't make assumptions about, how the school will perceive your profile, and don't discount some elements. I know, sometimes candidates can be dismissive of the GMAT or the GRE, and, don't think that it's a good representation of their academic ability. And, sometimes that may be the case, and that can be very frustrating. But, it's part of the process, and schools may cut you a little bit of slack, but they're not going to discount it completely. Right. And then, I guess related to that, not spending enough time really understanding what it is the school is looking for, and, how you meet those criteria and what you bring to the program in that context. So, for example, Emma mentioned, international experience is very important to INSEAD and London Business School. And sometimes, when I was working at INSEAD, you sometimes see candidates who have kind of skate over that in their application and don't really explain what they've gained from their international experience, what they've learned, or maybe they haven't got a lot of international experience, but they've been working in an international company, but it's not clear if they've actually been working in international teams or not. So, that it's important to, think very carefully about what the school is looking for and what you bring in that regard. And then I would say that, all schools see applications that have clearly been submitted in a big rush. A lot of people work well under pressure, and the deadline is looming, and that's when a lot of the applications get churned out and submitted at the last minute. But file readers have a very good eye for picking out whether you've actually spent a good amount of time reflecting and thinking about how to present yourself holistically versus someone who has dashed off the essays or put together a slapdash resume at the last minute. Or sometimes candidates spend a lot of time, for example, on the essays, and will spend months and months, iterating through the essays, and then the online form is something that they dash off at the last minute because it seems fairly straightforward, and it is fairly straightforward, but they'll end up making silly data entry errors at the last minute and not checking that and not proofreading it thoroughly. And so, those little details can be quite irritating to the file reader, and just, it detracts from the overall presentation. So, it's important to, start early and, build a timeline for yourself so that, nothing is being left to the last minute. And, likely you're very busy. Most MBA candidates, by their very nature, have demanding day jobs and, might not always be in full control of their time because your boss is going to send you off somewhere for an intensive project, and that's right when you were planning to work on your MBA application, and there's perhaps not a lot you can do about that. So, making sure you build in enough buffer time so that, you can really do yourself justice in the application.
Okay, so for someone applying in the upcoming season, 2017-2018, how should they get started, and what's their timeline or plan of action that would basically lead to a more effective result? Emma, can you handle that one?
Sure. I think, as Caroline said, people are busy, and we know that admissions committees know that, we know that, we see that with our clients all the time, is that people who come to us at this point in the year, even if they start really early in their applications, they're going to get squeezed at some point because they're dealing with big deadlines at work, and it's always at the wrong time. And so one of the things that we do is try and put together a very fair timeline for people so they can get started early on. But I mean, really, the best advice is the earlier the better, because we recommend that you try and apply as early in the admissions cycle as you possibly can. But if you are looking at one of the US schools and you haven't started doing any research yet, then you really need to get moving on it. INSEAD and LBS have a slightly longer cycle that goes through later. So I think LBS had one of its admissions deadlines yesterday. So you can perhaps look at, if you're applying to, of course, more than one school, you can look at staggering it in that respect as well. So if you perhaps apply to your first choice school earlier on, and then you can, while you're waiting on that decision, you might perhaps apply slightly later to another school. But it's all about sort of working out. There's no set timeline for, you know, everybody. It's about working out how it fits around your commitments, and that can be professional commitments, but also personal commitments, because the whole MBA journey is often about people's families or partners as well, and it has to fit in around your lifestyle as it you know, currently exists.
Now, most people believe, and I wonder if you think this is true, that if you apply in round one, you have a better shot. And it's mainly because virtually all the seats in the class are empty, except for maybe some deferred candidates who have stolen a few seats. But obviously in round two and round three, and some schools have round four, there are a lot of offers are out there, and there aren't as many seats. What do you two think about that? Is there an advantage in applying early to a school or not?
Yeah, I'll start with that. And I think it's a little bit different. It depends on the school. So, you know, with the top US schools, you know, we normally advise candidates go for round one or round two. INSEAD and London Business School both have 4 rounds. And then with INSEAD, with the 2 intakes, you know, there are rounds pretty much all year. So, you know, you can apply at a different time of year than you would be able to apply to some other schools. I would say that, you know, if you've got a really common profile, for most schools, it's better to avoid the final round. So, you know, with INSEAD, that's round 4. But between, you know, round 1 and round 2, there's really no difference at all. All right. So you're much better off applying, you know, when you're ready. As we were saying, don't rush your application. It's better to apply a little bit later and submit, you know, the best possible application you can than to rush to submit for an earlier deadline. So, you know, with INSEAD, just, you know, avoid round 4 if you've got a common profile. With LBS, I think, you know, Emma, you often advise people to you know, focus on the first 3 rounds. It's also a smaller class, so things can get a bit tighter now in the final round.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interestingly, the final round, a lot of places tend to go to Brits because for some reason they leave it till the last minute. I guess they don't have to move very far. I don't know what it is, whether it's just in the national psyche to apply late. I mean, I would generally, if you can, recommend round 1 or round 2, even though there are 4 rounds. The biggest round traditionally is round 2, which is always, well, usually the end of the first week or in the first week in January. The other thing is, if you apply later in the year, you're going up against people who've been on the wait list. So they've been very good candidates who perhaps have been waitlisted in round 1 and round 2. So you're not only applying against people in round 3 and round 4 for remaining spots, but you're being assessed against people who applied earlier in the year but were waitlisted. So fully agree with Caroline. You know, it's better to apply when you are ready. There's absolutely no point applying with a subpar application when you could have done better. But having said that, I would recommend, if you can, by round 2. But if not, yeah, definitely there are spots in round 3 and round 4. The other thing, of course, to bear in mind is scholarships. So if you are looking to get some financial aid from that area, then scholarship cut-offs will often be before the final round. So that's something to bear in mind. But, you know, in terms of class size, you know, LBS is increasing its class size very slightly next year. So, you know, there are the word from the admissions office would always be, if you are an excellent candidate, then you can apply at any point and there should be a spot for you.
Now, isn't it true, though, if you apply in the last round, oftentimes admission committees are looking for specific people in terms of diversity to round out or craft the class, where in the beginning rounds, that extra criteria may not exist. Like if I need someone from Africa, I have no one from Africa in my class, and I'm in the last round and I have a number of African candidates to consider, am I more inclined to go with one of them than someone else who might actually even be better qualified, but not better for the class as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that balancing diversity in an MBA class is perhaps the most difficult part of the admissions committee's job, and you know, that process starts right from round 1. So you might perhaps get a whole lot of, you know, very driven, organised bankers and consultants who apply in round one. And yes, they won't all be admitted, but there might be some very good candidates who will be waitlisted, and yes, they will come up later on in the year against perhaps slightly more unusual candidates who haven't applied early. As I said, at LBS, it's often the Brits who take up the spots in round 4 because, you know, they are an important part of a global class, and for some reason they apply late. I think, you know, admissions committees work very hard to balance diversity based on, you know, professional background, based on nationality and culture, but at the same time, and I think the same goes for INSEAD, they're not going to admit somebody in round 4 that they feel is not up to a particular standard just because they come from Africa or they're in an underrepresented group. So, you know, if there's one spot left and you have 2 people of equal merit who come from different profiles and one is not yet in the class, yes, that person will get the spot, but they won't get it over someone who is, you know, better qualified generally just because they come from that.
Right. So the questions are coming in, and some of them are really good. I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to go to Q&A with the audience. You know, most applicants new to the process assume there are only 2 outcomes. Either you're admitted or you're rejected. But in fact, there is this third outcome that we've been talking about in some vague terms, and it's called limbo, the wait list. And I imagine, I mean, if I were a candidate, frankly, I'd rather be rejected than end up on a wait list and then have to chew my fingernails for God knows how many weeks or months before I actually get a decision. But why do schools have wait lists? How do they use them? And if you're stuck on one, is there anything you can do to get off?
Sure. Well, I'll start, and Emma, please chip in the LBS perspective. So schools are using the wait list to help them manage the class size and the diversity. As Emma was saying, you know, crafting that diversity is quite a challenge. And so, you know, when they make an offer to a candidate, they have no guarantee that person's going to accept that offer. So there's always a certain percentage of candidates who get an offer who then decline that offer. So the school will use the wait list to you know, compensate for those people who are dropping out, and so it depends, you know, who drops out. If they get certain profiles that drop out, that go elsewhere, then it may mean that they're dipping into the wait list to look for those specific profiles to then bring that back into the classroom. I mean, the schools understand it's a very difficult situation for candidates to be in. I mean, I hear what you say. You know, it is quite unpleasant, but I mean, I encourage candidates to, you know, try to think positively about it. You know, the good news is that the door is still open, right? So there is still hope, and schools do make offers to waitlisted candidates. So, you know, there is still a chance, and you know, there are certain things that you can do to you know, to help your chances. So, you know, stay in touch with the school. If you disappear and they don't hear anything from you for 4 or 5 months, then they may well assume that you're not really interested and, you know, kind of discount you from the wait list. On the other hand, you know, if you're on the phone every 48 hours, then you're going to be marked as, you know, a pest, and they haven't got any more time for you, so you might get cancelled from the wait list because you know, they're fed up of all the communication. So getting the right balance, you know, staying in touch on a regular basis, but sending, you know, thoughtful communications, helpful communications, any updates about your profile are useful for the school to know. And also, you know, if you get waitlisted, you know, think carefully about what might have, if there's some weakness that might have let you down a little bit, and is there something that you can do about that? So, I mean, one obvious factor could be that, you know, your GMAT is below the average for the school. Well, you know, think long and hard about retaking it, because that could seriously boost your chances of getting off the wait list. Or, you know, it might be something that's a bit trickier to address in the short term. So, you know, with INSEAD or London Business School, it could be, you know, lack of international experience versus other candidates. That could be harder to address, you know, within a couple of months. But, you know, if you get, perhaps you can get some sort of, you know, project where you're working with international colleagues, or perhaps you didn't fully explain the extent of your international experience in your application. So, there are ways of bringing that up with a school, and that it may help your chances.
Yeah, and I mean, we have clients who come to us and we work with them to develop a waitlist strategy to help them, because sometimes people are very confused about the waitlist and they're not sure, how much they should interact with the school when they're in that situation. And adcons can be a bit standoffish because they don't want to be deluged with, daily updates. Caroline was saying they don't want a phone call every 48 hours and they don't need one. But it can be something sometimes as simple as actually getting yourself on the radar of somebody on the committee or somebody in the admissions team. So if you haven't visited campus and you have an opportunity to do so, to sit in on a class and then to try and meet with somebody on the team and have a chat, that can make a huge difference, because the next time they're looking at a pile of paper, they go, oh, I remember that person they came to visit. And that's not practical for everybody, but sometimes it is, and sometimes it can make the difference. And there are different ways and approaches of going about it, but that's as I say, one of the things that we work with people sometimes to try and help them off and out of limbo.
Okay, I'm hoping that no one in attendance ever gets on a wait list, but if you do, there is hope. There is hope. All right, let's go to the Q&A. We have a question from someone. I think this is an interesting question to me because it relates to work experience and how much you should have. The person asked, would you suggest applying with only 4 years of work experience, or should they wait 1 more year, get that 5th year under their belt, and then apply? The assumption here by the questioner is that his or her application would be better with 5 years of work experience than 4. What do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, schools look at the length of your work experience in terms of how much experience you will have by the time you start the program. So, if you're applying this fall for entry next year, then that would give you an additional 1 year of work experience in any case. So I'm not sure if the person who answered the question has taken that into account, and it's not always obvious to candidates that schools are looking at it in terms of length of experience up to starting the program. So it may well be that actually that would then give them 5 years. The average at INSEAD now is just over 5.5 years. How much is it at LBS now, Emma?
Yeah.
It's similar. But there is a range, right? So, the range is typically sort of 2 years to about 10 years. And so, you do not have to meet the average to apply. And it can be difficult sometimes to apply with just sort of, if you're coming in with 2 or 3 years work experience, and therefore at time of application, you might only have sort of 18 months work experience on paper. And the tricky thing then can be sort of conveying how much you've achieved in that time, because obviously you've had less time than someone who's been working for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and you might not have yet been promoted or might not have had much management experience. And so demonstrating your potential is more challenging at an early stage in your career. But the schools do take people at that stage, so it's certainly not impossible. And if you're not sure about timing, I encourage candidates to err on the side of applying a little bit too early, because if it doesn't work out, you can apply again, right? But it's better to start applying to business school when you're still a bit below the average amount of work experience or the average age, because a lot of people have to go through more than one cycle before they do get into a school that they want to go to. And so, start early so that you're not then applying as someone who's, way over the average age or over the average length of work experience, at which point, can start to count against you.
Right. So does LBS and INSEAD treat GRE scores the same as they treat GMAT scores?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I've just been dealing with a candidate who did the GRE score and she did the GRE test because she thought it would represent her abilities better, and she has a place at a different school, not at LBS. I think I'd be correct in saying that the preferred test is still GMAT, but they absolutely do accept GRE. And as we've mentioned all the way through, it's not just about one particular score. So, if you do the GRE and you score well in that, and that's backed up by a good GPA and by a good professional experience and a track record of, promotions, etc., and a strong application generally, then it's absolutely fine. I think from a discussion we were having with colleagues last week, GRE are also starting to amend their tests to make sure that they are in line with the quality and the level of questions that GMAT are asking. So that, I think, Caroline, can you remember when those changes are coming online?
Yes. Well, so I think that started already. So the GRE is evolving to look a bit more like the GMAT because ETS want the GRE to be an effective competitor with the GMAT as regards entry to business school. So I think that the tests will become more interchangeable. But I mean, certainly for INSEAD for the time being, they do have a clear preference for GMAT. Now they do accept GRE as well, but for someone who hasn't yet taken a test and is thinking which route to take, INSEAD would rather they went down the road of GMAT. They see that as a better, for the time being, as a better predictor of academic performance on the program.
Okay, and now how does London Business School consider reapplicants? Is their admit rate higher, lower than it would be for the traditional pool?
I think it's a difficult place sometimes coming in as a reapplicant, and I think you have to be very careful how long you leave between reapplying. If you are dinged in round 3 or round 4 and then you're applying again in round 1 of the next year, there is very little that you're likely to be able to demonstrate in terms of improvement to your profile. I think that there are 2 reasons people are dinged in the first place, and one is that they don't have the necessary experience or sort of ability. In which case, perhaps leaving only 6 months between your reapplication, you're not going to have had the time to deal to that. Or, as in the case of the reapplicant I dealt with last year, he just hadn't been able to sell himself effectively the first time around. So when he reapplied, he was accepted. But it's a different story for every reapplicant, depending on what position they've come from. I think reapplicants have it a bit tougher generally because they have to prove, if they've been dinged once, they have to prove why they're worth being considered a second time. So you need to make sure if you have already been dinged first time around, firstly, definitely don't send in the same essays. Make sure you rewrite those because often the previous file is considered alongside the new one. And you really need to say, LBS has an optional essay for its second question. Use that to say, this is where I was dinged, I get it, this is where I am now, and this is what I've done in the meantime. These are the steps that I've taken to make myself more competitive for your pool. You need to really, really think about the difference between then and now, because otherwise you just will be in the ding pile. It's tough, and it's something you have to really put some effort into.
Caroline, someone asks, will recruiters consider someone in their mid-30s more seriously than someone in their mid-20s? Well, first off, from these MBA programs, these two programs tend to admit older students with more work experience than does many of the U.S. schools. Mm-hmm. So there wouldn't be many mid-30 graduates from London Business School and INSEAD, correct?
Right, so the age range is typically sort of 23 to 35 at INSEAD, so you will have a few people. I mean, there's not a lot of 35-year-olds, but you'll have a few people, there'll be a group of people sort of, 32, 33, 34, 35 on the program. So I mean, recruitment, it varies a little bit by industry. Management consulting, typically, they're looking for younger candidates. So, if you're in your 30s, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to get an interview with McKinsey, Bain, or BCG than if you're in your mid-20s. So I think that that's one of the key differences that students will see as regards age and how that impacts recruitment. For roles in industry, so if you're looking to go into marketing or finance, business development, general management, then having a bit more work experience may count in your favor. All right, so it really depends on the specific recruiter, and I would encourage candidates to do some research into the recruiters that they would be interested in and what sort of profiles they are recruiting. All right, because sometimes candidates will apply, and perhaps they are 33, 34 at time of application, and they're saying they want to go work for MBB, and that's going to be a red flag to the admissions committee, because the admissions committee will know that that's going to be quite challenging, and therefore they're concerned that the candidate doesn't have a accurate view of their chances and what they should be heading towards. I don't think you've necessarily got a big advantage if you are older, except some specific industry roles where they're looking for specific experience. Perhaps you're more likely to be able to make a case for bringing that if you have 5, 6, 7 years work experience versus someone who's got 2 or 3 years work experience.
I think, just if I can jump in there, I think there's also a bit of a misconception, certainly about LBS, that the admissions committee prefer sort of more work experience. And certainly when I was working there, we had a specific drive to try and bring the average age and the average amount of work experience down slightly, just because of feedback from recruiters who were looking to recruit people with less experience. So I think people shouldn't be discouraged from applying to LBS and INSEAD if they only have, like 18 months, 2 years, 3 years experience, because there are a lot of really smart people out there who've got really worthwhile experience about what you've done, not how long you've been doing it for. So someone who's got some really classy, 2 or 3 years really classy work experience is just as competitive as somebody with 5 or 6 years who's, perhaps not been doing a whole lot for 2 or 3 of those years. So it's all about the individual profile, and I wouldn't want people to be put off applying to our sort of 2 schools because they feel like they're not going to be given due consideration.
Right. How does this is Caroline, how does the INSEAD experience differ between the January intake and the September intake?
Right. Yeah. So the structure is very similar. I mean, it's the same program. The key difference is the internship option in the summer months if you do the January entry. So if you start in September, you're going to graduate the following June. You go straight through in 10 months, and you don't have the opportunity to take an internship during the program. Although some people may take an internship at the end of their program and then get recruited into a full-time position by their internship employer. But most people then, actually taking full-time jobs rather than looking for an internship at that stage. So, and the January entry is advised for people who are looking to make a switch into investment banking, because that summer internship is really a key recruitment mechanism into that sector. And so, the school does encourage people, if they're looking to make that career switch, it's much better to apply for the January entry than for the September entry. So that's the main difference. I mean, otherwise, you're going to have the same opportunities during the year. The level of competition is the same. I mean, sometimes people wonder, is it easier to get in for one class than the other? It's not. The school does get some more applications, so there's a higher application volume for September than for the January entry, but the yield is higher for the January entry than for the September entry, so there's a higher percentage of people accepting the offer, which means that actually the offer rate is the same across the 2 classes. So there's no benefit in thinking, should I try and go for the class where it's a little bit easier. It makes no difference. And it's also, makes no difference whether you're applying to start in Fontainebleau or Singapore. Sometimes people wondering about, whether that can affect your chances, because actually the admissions committee won't see where you want to start the program. They're not taking that into account when they make a decision on your file. So for the timing, I would say, think most carefully about the internship and how important that's going to be for you, and whether, that's going to be critical for you for perhaps making a career switch.
Right. Now, I know both of you have had recent conversations with people at both LBS and INSEAD, and we do have a question from the audience on apparently forthcoming changes in the INSEAD MBA program. Could you comment on them, Caroline? And could you also, Emma, give us a little update on what you've learned in terms of the MBA program at London Business School, whether there are going to be some changes at new classes coming in? We'll see.
Sure. Shall you start, Caroline?
Okay, I'll make a start. So as regards to the program, so they've launched what they're calling a personal leadership development program. which is part of the curriculum. So this is to help people go a little bit deeper in developing their leadership skills and putting more structure around that across the program, and also putting more structure around helping students develop their self-awareness about their skills, about their future career goals. So, you know, it's a learning process, but it also helps them very much with the job search and with recruitment. And, you know, with a one-year program, you need to dive into the recruitment process pretty quickly. You don't have a lot of time to sort of mull around different options before you make up your mind what you want to focus on. So this new component of the curriculum will also help people get focused on that. And as a result, the admissions office is starting to look a little bit more carefully at the softer skills. So, I mean, that's always been, you know, an important part of the evaluation, but given this evolution in the curriculum, they are scrutinizing in a bit more detail, you know, emotional intelligence, creativity, initiative, communication skills, that will feed in and be very important for that new part of the curriculum. Otherwise, one other update for the September 2018 entry. So, you know, the school will start processing applications in September for that class. They will start to evaluate the IR part of the GMAT, the integrated reasoning. So, so the school says they're looking for, they advise candidates to target a score on that of 6 or above. So they've been collecting data on the IR scores of people who've been admitted to the program to see, you know, what sort of level do people have, and to try and gauge what they want people to target once they start using that as part of the evaluation process. So for the time being, what they're advising is that candidates target a score of 6 or above.
Emma?
Over to you, Emma.
Okay. So LBS, you know, this is straight from the horse's mouth, actually. Exciting year coming up. So the class that starts in September will have access and be using the new Samiofa building, which is a fantastic new building which was built with an endowment over the last few years. It's the 50th anniversary of the MBA, so it's still a young program, but that's quite a milestone for the school. They have a new dean starting this year as well. There's a new program being rolled out from September, which will be more flexible. For the first time, students will be able to make their core courses flexible, so they'll be able to target particular areas where they would like to follow. And they're very excited about a core course called London CAP, which is very much an applied module which will integrate students working with businesses in and around London. In terms of the actual admissions process, it will be very similar to this year, which might be useful to some people because LBS is notoriously late at putting out their essay questions and their processes. But David Simpson advises me that people could expect similar essays and structures to last year in terms of the application, the local alumni interview, video submission, and then the decision after that. And in terms of who they're looking for this year, just some feedback to people that obviously they're still interested in a hugely global, very diverse class. They're particularly interested in hearing a bit more from people who are into business analytics, fintech, AI, also people that come from large family businesses, which may be of interest to some people who are listening this evening. But other than that, there'll be more scholarships available, partly as part of the 50th anniversary push. And they'll be particularly targeting some sectors and nationalities as they always have done, but they're trying to keep as many of them open as possible just for sort of general talent. So yeah, it looks like an interesting period for the program.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank both of you for a terrific session. I want to thank our audience for some great questions. If you have any additional questions, you can still ask them. Send them in to info@fortunaadmissions.com. If you'd like a free consultation with a Fortuna Admissions advisor, you can also go to fortunaadmissions.com/free-consultation and get one. Meantime, Caroline, Emma, a pleasure as always.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
And actually, Emma is going to be joining us in London at Centre Court. If you want to go to Centre Court, and you should, if you are an MBA applicant or would-be applicant, we're having them in New York this Sunday at the New York Times Center. in London, basically in 2 weeks, in a very cool location, and then in San Francisco at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center later in June. And these are really unique MBA admission events. Actually, my partner in crime on this is Caroline and Emma's partner in crime, Matt Simons, who's a veteran in this business. And he and I will be hosting all of these 3 events. We have the best schools in the world attending, either as panelists or tabletop presenters who you can converse with one-on-one. You'll get to meet us, and more importantly, you'll learn a lot about MBA admissions and what these schools are really looking for. So thank you very much, and if you want to hear this again, see this again, go to fortunaadmissions.com. You will find it there, and you can refer your friends, your relatives, and your enemies to see it as well if you'd like. Meantime, good luck to all of you. Pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.